Good evening and welcome to this evening's webinar on Getting Ready for Winter, a Landlord's Guide. I'd like to say thank you very much everybody for joining us this evening. It's much appreciated indeed. Just a couple of housekeeping things to mention first of all. You can hear me speaking and you can see my slides on your computer, but we can't hear you. But what you can do, what we'd really appreciate, is if you could put any questions or comments to us by using the chat box that you can see on the right hand side of your screen at the bottom. It's the last tab on the panel that you've got there. So do please put any questions that you would like us to answer or comments during the course of this webinar. We will go through some slides that we've put together to get ourselves ready for autumn and winter, and then we'll be doing 10-15 minutes of questions at the end, and we'll try and answer as many as we possibly can. And there's just a bit of interaction in terms of a poll we've got as well coming in, so please do participate in that. So without further ado, I will crack on, and just to say thank you very much again for joining us this evening. It's much appreciated. For those of you that don't know me, I've been a landlord for the last 16 years or so. I've got properties in northwest London where Upad is based, and also in Swansea. And it was off the back of being a landlord that I launched Upad about 5 years ago now, as I found it a frustrating experience using traditional high street agents or using classified sites online, and just thought there had to be a better way for landlords to manage their portfolio. So that was very much sort of the background of the business. We've now grown to become the largest online letting agent in the UK. We've let properties for just over 10,000 landlords. And whether you're wanting us to let your property and find tenants, or manage it, or reference your tenants, all those services you'd get from a traditional high street agent we offer 7 days a week, and everybody you speak to is Searle accredited. I'm also joined this evening by Richard Searle from British Gas. It's a real honour, Richard, for you to be joining us this evening. Thank you very much indeed for giving us your Tuesday evening over the next 45 minutes or so. So thank you very much indeed for joining us.
No problem, thank you.
Richard, as you can see from the slides in front of us, has been in the industry for some considerable time, has built up a huge amount of experience and gives a huge amount of guidance to British Gas's engineers and installers on a daily basis, and is very much the go-to man for sort of operation procedures within British Gas. So he's an absolute wealth of experience, and Richard, I'll be relying on you in the Q&A for any of those tricky questions that people ask us. If obviously there's any questions about doing triathlons, I think I'll fire them your way too.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll see how many questions we get to do with fitness training and what food you should be eating to do really well as a triathlon. But it's a real pleasure to have you this evening. Thank you very much indeed. Just do a quick poll. It'd be really helpful for us, Richard and myself, just to know who we've got in the room, as it were, to speak. So if you could kindly select one of the following options that's coming up on your screen of what most applies to you in terms of whether you are thinking about becoming a landlord or whether you've been a landlord for a long period of time, that will be much appreciated. Let me just see if I can bring this up. Hang on. Oh, I think my computer's playing up a little bit, but maybe we'll come back to this later on. But normally it's quite just helpful for me to know who we've got in the room, whether it's people that have just started being a landlord all the way through, so maybe we'll come back to this. But over the next 45 minutes or so, the 5 key things that we are going to be covering off is preparing your property for the autumn and winter period, advice for tenants to keep your property safe at the end of the day, how to upgrade your property, just some top tips that both Rich and I will cover off, and then we're both around to do the Q&A at the end. And I think just as an introduction, and why both Richard and I are really keen to do this webinar this evening, is we've increasingly found that people in today's generation, especially tenants in their 20s and 30s, really don't have much of sort of DIY skills or maintenance skills that very much existed 2 generations back. And people's ability to look after a property is almost becoming sort of non-existent to how it was sort of 40, 50 years ago. I think therefore there is a duty upon us as landlords to ensure that our properties are being protected over the winter and autumn period, because if tenants don't have the know-how, I think it's very much down to us to ensure that we are protecting our own properties and acting on behalf of tenants. If anybody's got any thoughts on that, please do use the chat box on the right-hand side. Richard, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, and whether from your experiences at British Gas you've seen increasingly sort of less DIY maintenance skills coming through from your perspective.
I have noticed that. I'm now sort of 51, but I've noticed that people do have less DIY skills, and I think even the sort of home bases and the likes of this world sort of report the same sort of things. Yeah, just all I can do really is agree with you.
Okay. Much appreciated. And I think the reason why we thought it was worthwhile doing this webinar this evening is our clocks go back in a couple of weeks' time, and British summertime then seems a very appropriate time for talking through this webinar. It's very much soon upon us. I think a lot of companies like British Gas and the likes have seen an increase in calls from people to do with their boilers not working as we've started firing up them for the first time in 6 months or so. So preparing your property, a couple of things that we think is worthwhile to be focused on is if as landlords we improve the efficiency of our property, it's going to help our tenants out. And I think from my perspective, whilst it's it's nice for tenants to have lower bills because the property is more efficient, I also think it makes it more appealing when you're advertising your property to rent, to say that it's got a good EPC rating, that it's got double glazing and so on and so forth. So there's a double reason there to improve the efficiency of your property. And also I think the safer and the more secure your property is, the more likely your tenants are to stay in that property, and less churn, tenants moving less frequently is clearly a good thing for us as landlords. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think we cover insulation a little bit later, but I've just scribbled myself some notes, and things like increasing efficiency could be simple things like lagging, reducing drafts and through doors and windows, letterboxes. If you've got any holes that go into the cavity wall, they'll all suck out heat out the building and reduce the efficiency.
Yeah, no, totally agree with you there. One of the most important things I think to be focused on is the heating system, and I think there's a few sort of top tips that are worth looking at, especially at this time of the year. So maybe it's a good time to do your sort of monthly, quarterly inspection. Go around with a radiator key and bleed all the radiators. This is crucial to sort of get any air that is in there out so that they're working as efficiently as you possibly can. It will also highlight whether there's any sludge in there. When you do bleed your radiators and sort of brown water comes out rather than clear water, it may be a sign there's got a lot of sludge in there, therefore not working particularly efficiently, also likely to get blocked up, so bear those things in mind. When you do go around over the next couple of weeks, do check the thermostat and timer is on the right time zone. I think there's an increasing, especially new builds, of having thermostatic radiator valves, so you're making sure your property is working as efficiently as you can. You can obviously fit these to existing radiators if you're not putting a whole new system in. And also, it's good just to get the boiler a quick once over, either properly serviced, or just doing it yourself, checking that the pressure is sort of above 1 bar and no more than sort of 2.5 bars. Have a look at how well it's performing. Have a think about how long that boiler's been there and whether it's nearing the end of its life. I think boilers have if they last 20 years, that's good. So anything over 15, you should start thinking about replacement if it's making sort of those creaky noises. Richard, do you want to add stuff as well there?
Yeah, I'm just picking up on the first point, bleeding radiators, just for your client's benefit. The best way to do, or not to do bleeding the radiators, but make sure your clock or your system's turned off, and then you'll have no chance of sucking air back into the system. So if you do that, it will make the system fairly neutral. And I think you were talking about pressures, system pressures on a boiler, a sealed system boiler, are typically 1 bar. And if you do bleed sort of several radiators or someone takes them off to decorate, you're probably going to end up, if it's a sealed system, to repressurise the system. So your tenants might want to know where the filling loop is and how to do that.
That's a really good point, actually. Make sure you bleed the radiators first and then check the pressure on the boiler maybe the following day or later that day rather than the other way around. Otherwise, it's sort of in the wrong order, as it were. The other side is to do with pipes. Make sure, in particular, on the external of your property, that all your pipes are lagged. You know, this is where the cold weather, especially when it's getting below zero, that pipes can freeze. Obviously, when they freeze, they're going to burst. So make sure that they're all lagged to prevent what you can see in the picture occurring in terms of just turning to ice. And obviously, as water freezes, it expands, and that's why pipes crack. Also be aware, in particular with garden taps as well, if there's water within the tap. I think, Richard, you've got a couple of useful bits of top tips for landlords as well there, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, the pipe we've got, or the waste pipe we've got there, or the rainwater pipe, I should say, you're clearly not going to be able to insulate that, but certainly condensate waste pipes, if they're not lagged, that's something you might want to consider. I did say to you earlier regarding outside taps, so if you've got a means of isolation on the inside of the property and you turn it off, you want to consider opening the tap on the outside of the property, so if the water does freeze in the pipe and expands, it's not going to burst the pipe, it'll probably push water out or ice out the end of it. And just very quickly, coming back onto your previous slide, when you were talking about boiler servicing, you know, we can check defective seals, the flue gas analyzer checks can check combustion, hopefully improve the reliability of the appliance and hopefully address any potential issues that we can spot that maybe are not a problem there. But thank you.
Indeed. And also, obviously, in the loft, if there's pipes up there and the property isn't particularly well insulated up there, and therefore it's likely to be colder than the rest of the house, make sure that those pipes are also lagged to ensure you don't have any nasty surprises over the winter period. Another key consideration relates to having air bricks and vents, that they're all completely clear. If not, it's very easy for condensation to build up because there's nowhere for the moisture to go. These are also considerably important for gas and solid fuel appliances. We'll come onto these in a second, but having ventilation when you're using a gas or solid fuel appliance is an absolute essential. So just make sure that it's not stuffed full of paper, that it hasn't got blocked up with dust and so on. It's also quite useful in my, what I do is to sort of get the hoover out and just use the nozzle against your vents. And actually, whilst we're on this subject matter, also the vents in your bathroom as well, just to sort of get any fluff, etc., out of there so that air can circulate efficiently. Do you agree with that, Richard?
I do. I'd also say that oil appliances would come into that category. So we've got the gas, solid fuel, and oil. And also another tip is some tenants and even householders are quite clever at blocking vents. And in this one we can see, I think they've used newspaper, but it's not unknown to use cling film, and clearly you can see through cling film, so it might appear not to be blocked. So if you're between tenancies poking a screwdriver through the slats, you suddenly might find you pop some cling film that someone's used. A little tip there. No,
great. Really useful bits of information there for landlords to avoid having these issues. So the other things that are worth looking at, and just sort of going back to the outside of the property, check the roof, check that there's no missing tiles or cracked tiles, because obviously water can get in through there. Check the guttering, that they're not full of leaves, especially as they're all starting to come down now. If leaves are blocking the guttering, it prevents water from coming down on the downpipe, and therefore water will overflow and fall down the side of the property against the brickwork, which can cause damp work. So just make sure they're completely clear as much as you can, which is worth just sort of considering there. Also, just within the garden, it's worth just, whether you do it or get a garden ring or getting your tenants to do it, if there is a garden in your property, it's a really good time to get things sort of cut back. Not much is going to grow between now and the springtime. Put away garden furniture just so it doesn't get too much sort of green algae growing on it. If it's more solid furniture that can crack. If there's cracks in there, water gets in and it makes it worse, so make sure you put that away, or at least cover, so it's not going to get damaged by frost. Have a quick sort of skirt around looking at drains. I think it's also important to put covers over drains. One thing that I've very much noticed is it's very easy for these to get blocked up over the course of the year, and if water can't get drained away, especially as heavy rainfall starts occurring now, water obviously overflows and is just likely to cause damage to your property. And it's all about preventative ways to ensure you're looking after your property in tip-top condition. I think is crucial on that front.
Can I
yeah, sure, sorry.
Well? What I was going to say is, less so with drain pipes, but if anyone's got condensing boilers, which is obviously quite common these days, you've got the potential for the condensate waste to freeze. So if you've got well, ideally it should go terminate below the grating, but if you've got one of these sort of leaf guards around it, it'll hopefully stop the wind chill. So there's a fairly good tip there. Yeah,
no, good point. Thank you very much indeed for that. So if your property happens to be empty, either because you've just renovated it, or you're about to, or you just purchased, there's probably some additional things there. Just make sure you leave the heating on a low light. It's got the sort of the frost option on the thermostat, use that, but just keep it on a little bit just so that it doesn't get cold on the inside. Be aware also of just condensation building up. If it's empty for several weeks and windows aren't being opened, the front door isn't being open, it's very easy for condensation to sort of build up. So do keep a regular check on things. It's also probably worth, if there is a roof, to keep the hatch open just to allow ventilation to occur. Maybe have one or two windows just open a little bit, just to allow a bit of circulation and avoid condensation building up. And I think we'll come back to condensation in a little bit as well, but it's one of the bugbears at this time of year from my perspective, because clearly it's colder outside, so therefore windows aren't being opened as much, and it also means when tenants are cooking and doing all their washing, that clothes and cooking is occurring, which has got water that has to sort of go somewhere, and if the property isn't being ventilated, it just hangs around and does cause a huge amount of damage, which we'll come on to, I think, a little bit further on some advice and top tips on that. But it's one of the biggest bugbears for me.
Can I just add to that as well? We were talking about having the heating on as well. Hot or warm air holds more moisture than cold air. So if the heating's not on and you've got wet things around and can condensate out, if you've got some heat in the property, it's less likely to do so.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's a good point to understand the dynamics of what's occurring. Do check your home insurance. Make sure you're covered. If there is an eventuality of a flood or a fire, for example, what happens about loss of rent and rehousing your tenants if your property isn't habitable. British Gas do offer landlord insurance, and you get a discount with them if you go to their website. Obviously there's other providers as well, but it's just good to check the wording of it. I think all of us generally renew insurance, and I think there's a general shift of people going with the cheapest quote. But just read the wording of it, because it's one of those things, the devil in the detail, and it's worth just having a flick through that. From a tenant's perspective, I think there's things that are worth sharing with them. It goes back to what we said right at the beginning, that tenants are increasingly don't know what to do, and I think it's up to us to inform them, put a guide together. It may be worth, for your particular property, what we've talked about already, those things that apply in terms of leaving the roof hatch open, ventilation, the issue with condensation, and make them aware of this, and just periodically make sure during the course of the year as well that the heating goes on a little bit, just to sort of ensure that when everybody does fire it up in October, that it's going to work and not go wrong. So do keep your tenants informed of what they should be doing right from the very start. Condensation, as I was alluding to earlier, it's one of my personal bugbears, as it were. Tenants, I actually have a clause in my tenancy agreement about tenants not allowed to dry clothes inside, because it is just the biggest bugbear. And also, I think what we're also seeing is a growth of properties where it's very much open plan in terms of kitchen, lounge being open plan, and therefore it's hard to keep a kitchen self-contained with the door closed, maybe a window open there to allow the moisture from cooking to go out to the property rather than just within and spread within the whole property. So it's a real bugbear of just how properties are being changed, and also of drying clothes internally. What I would recommend, a couple of things, is make sure your tenants wipe down windows when there's condensation on there. It's easier to get these things in the bud than let them build up. And also, if you're starting to get black mold, which generally does occur because of condensation, it looks very unsightly, but it isn't a big thing. There's one of my sort of favourite products on the market is a company called HG that do a mold remover. I think it's about £7 for a bottle from Lakeland and obviously other stores as well, which is a really easy way of just removing black mold if there's been a lot of condensation. But just be on top of it with your tenants. You'll be able to tell because there's moisture on windows, and you can just see it, and try and prevent black mold from happening. There is something that is worth buying for your bathrooms, for the vents in there. There's a company called EnviroVent that do a really good extractor, and the reason I'm a fan of theirs is it's got a powerful motor in it, rather than one that just seems to make a noise but not do anything. And also just make sure that it takes moisture to the outside of the property rather than just within it, and ensure that the switch for your ventilator is also enabled and that your tenants haven't switched it off. EnviroVent do a vent that they sell, and I think it's called the SIL 100T. That's the SIL 100T, which is a really powerful vent, and it's just got a really strong motor in it. So I'd recommend having one of them in the bathroom, possibly in the kitchen, depending on the type of property that you've got. But condensation drives me insane. But there are steps to ensure you can minimise it, and just be on top of your tenants to ensure that they are following it all. In terms of how tenants can lower their bills, some of this might be common sense. A lot of it is in the press from time to time about turning off lights, using energy efficient bulbs, turning the thermostat down 1 degree, saves a considerable amount per annum, and only use things like your washing machine, dishwasher when it's fully charged. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I think that's fairly standard information. I know one of my colleagues kindly got that information from the Energy Saving Trust. Probably just pick up on closed curtains. I know my mum always used to put heavy curtains, as she called them, up in the winter, and lighter curtains up for the summer for obvious reasons. And just a lot of people probably don't know, but phone chargers plugged in. Most people probably realise they're taking energy when the phone's plugged into them, but when the phone's not plugged into them, they think they're probably they're not doing anything because they're a transformer. They're actually using energy when nothing's plugged into them. So, unplug them or at least switch them off at the wall.
No, another very useful top tip there. Really, really, really great. What I would also like just to add is, if anybody else has got top tips that they use with their tenants and their property, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen and do post any through to us, and we'll try and share them with everybody during the Q&A of anything that you found works really well when sort of the autumn winter period comes, in how you manage your own properties. It'd be really great to share some of those stories that you may have. So please do post any comments that you've got there. So in terms of keeping your tenants safe, there's a few things that are worth being aware of here. A lot of this has changed a little bit with government legislation that has come out. Obviously, one on smoke alarms and CO detectors is that the regulations have recently changed, where us as landlords need to ensure that we have fitted a smoke detector within our properties, and there needs to be one per story within the property. So even if it's a masonette flat or 2 stories, you need to have one per story. It doesn't matter whether it's hardwired or battery. Clearly hardwired is probably better, but if you're not renovating your property, battery works. There are lithium 10-year batteries you can buy, I'm a fan of putting one of those in because it's sort of a fit and forget attitude. Whilst it is a tenant's responsibility to ensure after they've moved in that they keep fresh batteries in there, we just need to make sure it's working properly before they move in. It's just good practice from my perspective. Where you put a smoke alarm isn't really an area of concern in terms of legislation. It just needs to be at least one per story. I would suggest somewhere near the stairs or the hallway probably makes the most amount of sense, but its physical location per story doesn't matter so much. It is also an obligation for us as landlords to ensure that we've got a carbon monoxide fitted in rooms where there is a solid fuel appliance. Now, this only applies in England, but my view is regardless of where your property is, and indeed whether it's a gas fired that you've got or whether it's solid fuel, I would still fit one. You know, these things are $10.99 or something from Homebase, and just for that peace of mind, going the extra mile, I think it's worth it. It's just good practice. This all came into effect a couple of weeks ago at the start of this month for all existing tenancies, but any new ones that start today, tomorrow onwards, they clearly apply too. But there is also a really big penalty for anybody who does not comply. There is no grace period, so if you're found out not to have a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide detector, it's your responsibility to ensure that it's in there. You're not given sort of 2 weeks to get it fixed and one in place. And given these things are very cheap to purchase, I just recommend just get on with it if you haven't already. You know, the amount of deaths and injuries that occur by people not having a smoke alarm is considerable. I think those properties that do have a smoke alarm, the statistic is something along the lines of somebody is four times more likely to survive in a house fire if there is a smoke alarm than where there isn't. So it's an absolute no-brainer from my perspective. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I'm not sure what the standard is for smoke alarms, but certainly the standard for the CO alarms is BSEN 50291. So that's the standard you should be looking for. These little things that look like old-fashioned slides with a red spot, not really the things you want to be using. So just to repeat that, it's BSEN 50291, and that means it meets the approved standard.
No, good. Much appreciated indeed. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Richard. So just other bits to do with gas safety. Make sure all your pipework, appliances and flutes are all working in good condition. It's our responsibility. We need to get a CP12 or gas certificate done annually. For those of you that don't know that, it's worthwhile to ensure you keep a copy for a couple of years should there ever be any issues. So that's just a good thing. And just make sure that whoever does your CP12s is registered with the gas safe register as well. So if you're using an independent person, not somebody from a big organisation like British Gas, just make sure that you're covered and that they are on the gas safe register so that you're getting it covered by a competent person. Finally, yeah, go on. Sorry, Richard.
I was going to say there's a couple of things there. You can check your installers. If you go onto Gas Safe site, there's a tab, check my installer. You can put their sort of name and credentials in there and check it. The other thing I was going to say is your safety check's not quite the same as a service. So if anyone's just having a basic safety check and something went wrong and it was to do with a lack of servicing, they could be found wanting. If they have the sort of full service done, it would be the gas safe registered company that were found wanting if there was a problem. So just a little tip there.
No, thank you very much indeed for that. That's much appreciated. And then the final bit we're just going to briefly sort of talk about in terms of upgrading your property. A couple of things just worth thinking about, whether this is for now or going forward, is about insulating your hot water tank. There's a huge amount of statistics out there about lagging it and just how much that saves you in energy from just heat not being wasted. Same applies with double glazing. I've recently renovated our home, and it was completely single glazed throughout, and now we've got double, triple everywhere. And it is amazing. I think our gas bill is something like 30% down year on year from doing so. The same applies with just lagging pipes and making sure you insulate your loft. There's a few subsidised and free actually insulation services out there, so it's worth just Googling that. There's more information on that link you can see from British Gas, and actually also under the handout section on the right hand side of your screen there's a guide from British Gas as well that is worth downloading, which is a PDF brochure there, and also one that we've put together about how to keep your tenants happy. I suggest you download both of those and have a look at it over the following days. And I alluded to this earlier on about increasing the appeal of your property. You know, when tenants see maybe 20, 30 properties that are available to rent in their locality, and they're all priced quite similarly, there's various things like, is the landlord doing the viewings himself? Are there any admin fees, which are an absolute turn-off from tenants? But also the property, how energy efficient is it? You know, how expensive are my bills going to be? And these things are increasingly motivating factors for tenants when they see 20 or 30 properties. And if there aren't any admin fees because your agent doesn't charge any, and Upad doesn't, for the benefit of doubt, if you're doing the viewings yourself and you've got an efficient property and it's double glazed and so on, it's going to be a real turn-off for tenants if that's not the case. So it's worth putting some effort in to give yourself put yourself in pole position over others online. One final bit, just going back to the condensation, is, you know, if there is black mold around the bottom of windows, for example, do buy that HG mold remover product. It's so quick and easy to sort of get rid of it, but it just looks so unsightly, but yet it's so easy to sort of get rid of. So do bear that in mind when you are advertising your property for rental. So that was the slides. We've got a few minutes left to do some Q&As. For those of you that haven't sent a question in yet, please do use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. Send any questions you would like through to us, and Richard and I will try and cover them off as much as we possibly can. There's been a few questions about whether I should have boiler breakdown cover that have come through. We've had sort of 4 or 5 questions to that effect. Before I pass over to Richard, I think from my perspective, I think this depends on your risk profile and also who you have in your sort of black book of contacts when things go wrong. I think it's a given things go wrong over the course of a year, especially autumn winter time when we're firing up our boiler for the first time in 6 months. And so if you've got people that, you know, more than just one that can fix boilers, then you know, maybe you're covered. If you want that peace of mind that should there be an issue, you've got one number to phone, it just gets fixed and you don't have to worry about it, you know, it'll get done speedily. Certainly companies like British Gas offer cover, and that would be sort of my take on it. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Richard, are you there, or have you got your phone on mute?
My phone was on mute. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you were saying. I mean, if you're getting the white van man from down the road, you know, as long as he's gas safe registered, no issues there. Just picking up on one thing, you know, you can be gas safe registered, but you might not have the competencies to work on all the appliances in that property. So don't just check their competencies, or rather their gas safe registered. Actually check that they've got the competencies for the appliances that you've got. And just picking up on, you know, if you were, for instance, British Gas, I think we say on our current adverts, you know, if you phone up before 12, I think we attend 90% of the calls that came in before midday. Just peace of mind, really. So.
That's fantastic. That's great. So yeah, I think it depends on your risk profile, and you know, you just want that peace of mind that it's just going to be dealt with, and you don't need to be concerned about finding somebody and letting them in and so on and so forth. There's been a few people asking questions in different ways, but all about how much of what we've been talking about for the last sort of 40 minutes or so should I do versus the tenants doing. And I think there's been a bit of a discussion within the chat box about, you know, at the end of the day, within their tenancy agreements, there's things about what they should not and should be doing. I think this just goes back to what I said right at the very beginning of this webinar, whereby we just as humans now know considerably less about DIY and maintenance than we ever did. And I think also when it's not your own property, the amount of care and attention that you put to it compared to it being your own is also probably quite dramatically different. And so I think because of those things, regardless of whether it's in the tenancy agreement that it's the tenant's responsibility, I think we should, beyond doubt, be telling landlords, telling tenants what they should be doing, or going around there and doing it ourselves in terms of bleeding the radiators and that sort of stuff. Because otherwise, I just can't see tenants in today's market doing it. And I think it's about educating them, it's about protecting your own investment. And yes, it's important that there is a physical agreement in writing, but there's also the practical side of life as well, where I think, yes, we should be telling tenants, but I think it's worth us doing the checks ourselves, because we know if they're not done, it's going to turn into a bigger issue. If the drains aren't cleared, if the vents aren't working properly, if there's condensation appearing and then you're starting to get black mould. I don't know whether, Richard, from what you have at British Gas, whether your experiences of being called out on jobs when it's rental properties, whether you think tenants are actually generally looking after properties today, or whether they just need a helping hand and support. Have you got your phone on mute again, Richard, or are you still there?
I was on mute.
Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
I think it's a bit of both. It depends on what end of the market you are. You've got £1 million flats in London. I think people are more likely to look after them, and then you've got the other end of the spectrum, which maybe they're a little bit less likely, but they probably all need that little bit of a hand or a bit of guidance. So.
Yeah. Fine. And then I think there's been a couple of top tips that have also been coming in. I think my favourite one that I've seen being mentioned is somebody saying they've got thermal linings for their curtains. It's amazing when you close your curtains, the amount of heat loss that is reduced, because it just it stops the heat just leaving the building, as well as stopping the draft that's coming through again. But people talking about putting thermal linings on their curtains, where you can either sort of sew them in or hang them separately to what you've got, and makes an absolutely huge difference. John Lewis and the likes apparently sell a lot of this type of stuff, so do bear that in mind. Richard, are there any top tips that you guys have seen or have known to be quite popular and worthwhile considering from a landlord perspective?
Can't think of any off the top of my head.
Sorry for putting you on the spot.
No, I mean a lot of it. No, I can't think of any off the top of my head. The heavy curtains, which is the line curtain type thing. I mean, you've only got to think about windows. Light is energy, and if you leave your curtains unpulled and you light your garden up, it shows you how much energy is going into the garden. It's light, you can't see heat, but similar sort of thing, really. So. Yeah.
No, quite. Cool. I think we've got time for a couple more questions to answer. There's a couple here about, and Richard, you may be better at answering this than me. Are there any systems which can indicate the amount of consumption that I'm using in terms of gas by unit, and therefore obviously I can work out the cost from there? Is there anything that you're aware of there?
Well, you've got the smart meters, which all the energy companies are rolling out. I think British Gas at the forefront of that. All the energy companies are doing it, and then you've got other devices that you can click on. I think they use a little magnet around by your meter and give you an idea of consumption. So you've got two spectrums there. One the energy company supplies and via your meter, whether that's electric or gas, and then you've got little devices that can be attached to your meter. You probably want to speak to qualified person before you want to attach them, or at least read the manufacturer's instructions. But two different.
Do you want to briefly explain what a smart meter is for anybody who doesn't know?
I'm not the expert on smart meters, but basically a smart meter will establish the energy consumption, whether that's gas or electricity. It will give you a readout. You know, if you're leaving doors and windows open and trying to keep your house warm, it won't. You know, it's not going to save you energy, but it's giving you feedback on usage in simplest terms. They're a little bit cleverer than that as well, because they can be switched between sort of prepayment and standard meter mode and various other bits and pieces. But essentially, they're telling you your usage.
Yeah. No, thank you very much indeed. And then just finally, I think this is what we'll end on here. Is there's been sort of a few comments talking about the fact of, you know, whose responsibility is it to ensure that the property is ready for winter. You know, how much effort should I go into it? Is this something I should go around you know, every month over the winter periods? That sort of discussion has been sort of going on, and I think it goes back to my view that being a landlord is something that you can't do passively. It's not a question of buy the property, get the property to an agent to let out. I think there's a big trick being missed if one goes down that particular route, and I think being active, being proactive even, and ensuring that your tenants are looking after the property, that the vents are all clear, that there isn't condensation, offering advice and top tips, actually helps us in the long run, that our asset, which is a increasingly an expensive asset, is being looked after effectively. And it does need nurturing, it does need care, it does need attention. And I think expecting tenants to do all of that is probably asking too much, and therefore it falls on us to sort of look after our own assets, pension fund income streams going forward. So I think whether we like it or not, I think it's worth it beyond doubt for us to be actively involved in the process. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add to that as a final question for tonight's webinar?
Probably not from a gas point of view, other than, you know, make sure you use a gas-based registered engineer. But, you know, picking up on what you were saying, so you can do something today, don't put it up to tomorrow. I can remember many years ago forgetting to sort of check my gutters, and if you're going to do that, you know, make sure you do it safely. But if you are checking gutters, it's just the weather we've got at the moment you want to be doing it in. I can remember being up at my gutters on Christmas Day where gallons of water were pouring over the gutters because I hadn't cleaned them out on a nice sunny autumn day when I could have done, and it wasn't very nice.
Goodness gracious me. So hopefully there was some really useful bits of information there. Hopefully you had a pen and paper to hand to write down some of those areas that we've covered off. I'd really like to thank Richard from British Gas, who has offered a huge amount of insights this evening to keep our properties safe over the winter period. He's an absolute wealth of knowledge and information. So thank you so much, Richard, for giving up your Tuesday night. It's much appreciated indeed.
Not a problem. And just remember, those clocks go back in 10 and 12 days' time now.
Indeed. And I'd just like to thank everybody that has joined us this evening, and for giving up sort of 45 minutes or so of your valuable time. And I hope you found it to be worthwhile and you've got a few things out of it. You'll be getting an email shortly where you'll be able to watch this webinar again if you arrive late for whatever reason. But also there is a feedback form on there which I would really appreciate you completing. So if there's anything you think we could do better next time round, or other areas, other topics that you think would be good to cover off, please do mention them there, and how we can improve this going forward. Because without feedback, it's very hard for us to know what works and what doesn't, and it's a really invaluable tool for us to know what we can do to improve things. So please do give us any feedback that you think is relevant, good, bad, or indifferent. That would be much appreciated indeed. And just finally, it leaves me to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you very much again, Richard. Have a very pleasant evening and good night. My name is James Davis from Upad.